Marcus had his hands buried in an engine block when the rain turned the street into a ribbon of mirrors, oil and water bleeding together under the storefront lights of the shut-down mall. The woman's Mercedes had limped into the curb 3 blocks from his garage, and he'd been the only one still working at 8:30 on a Thursday. She'd called through the rain-streaked window of the repair shop, a tentative knock, not demanding, which surprised him, and he'd grabbed his jacket without thinking. Muscle memory of someone who couldn't afford to turn away work. Now, as his fingers traced the loose battery cable, he heard her footsteps retreat to the dry shelter of the car's interior. The soft slam of the door, a small punctuation mark in the evening. He was 34, with a daughter turning 12 next month, and a mortgage he'd never quite have enough for. The shop had been struggling for 2 years, ever since the highway bypassed downtown, and his ex-wife had moved 3 states away with her new husband, leaving child support checks that arrived late and a daughter with her mother's face but his stubborn jaw. Maya waited for him most nights in the back office, homework spread across the metal desk, trading math problems for the sound of her father's work in the bays beyond. This woman in the expensive car was the kind of person who saw people like Marcus as services rendered a name in a phone app, her problem solved, forgotten by the time she pulled into her driveway. The battery cable took 10 minutes to secure. Marcus stepped back, wiped his hands on his already black jeans, and tapped the window. She rolled it down carefully, as though handling something fragile. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the slight puffiness that suggested crying not long ago, and a diamond ring worn on the wrong finger, not the ring finger, which bore only a tan line. She looked at him with the neutral politeness of someone trained not to see service workers as fully human. "That should do it," he said. "Try the ignition." The engine turned over cleanly, and something in her shoulders released. She reached for her purse designer. He clocked it immediately, the kind of thing Maya sometimes pointed out in magazines, and extracted a credit card. "Thank you. How much?" "Nothing." Battery came loose. 10 minutes. He was already moving away, back toward the garage, wanting to be done with this interaction, wanting to return to the familiar territory of tools and metal, places where he understood the rules. "Wait." She pushed the door open, stepping into the rain. The hem of her dress caught the light dark fabric, expensive cut, the kind of thing that belonged in an office tower or a restaurant with reservation, not in Marcus's neighborhood. "At least take something. You're open late?" "I work late. It's fine." He was moving faster now, but she followed him, that dress getting soaked, her heels clicking on the wet concrete like an accusation. She stopped him at the garage threshold. "I can't let you do work for free." "You can. You just did." He turned and something in his face made her step back. Not anger exactly, something underneath it, something older. "You're welcome. Have a good night." The next morning, Marcus found an envelope slipped under the garage door. Inside was a check for $500 and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry for my tone, for the assumption. Jennifer Morrison." There was no number, no follow-up request, just the fact of her noticing that she'd been wrong and trying to fix it in the only way she seemed to understand, with money. He almost threw it away. Instead, he left it on the desk where Maya would see it when she got home from school. "That's a lot," she said, turning the check over in her hands. "Woman I helped last night. Didn't feel right taking it." Maya looked at the signature. "Are you going to cash it?" Marcus sat down at the desk, suddenly tired in a way that had nothing to do with the work. "Yeah, I think I am." He deposited it the next day and immediately felt cheap, which was irrational. Money was money. Except it wasn't. This money carried the weight of her guilt, and by cashing it, He'd accepted her assessment of what he was worth. He'd turned down real connection, her actual apology, had taken the clean transaction instead. For a man who measured his life in fair trades and honest work, it felt like a small betrayal. 3 weeks passed without incident. Then, on a Saturday morning when the shop was officially closed, Marcus was surprised to see a familiar Mercedes pull into the lot. His first instinct was irritations. Saturday was supposed to be paperwork and laundry, the thin slice of time he tried to spend with Maya before another week started. He'd already refused the check incident in his mind, filed it away as a lesson. People with money saw transactions, not people. Knowing this was meant to protect him somehow. Jennifer was alone this time, and she was dressed differently. Jeans, a simple sweater, her hair pulled back without the professional styling. Up close, she looked younger than she had in the rain, or perhaps just more human. She saw him through the office window and raised her hand in a small gesture, not quite a wave, asking permission to approach. "I shouldn't be here," she said before he could speak. "I know you're closed, but I wanted to. I have something for you. For your daughter, actually. I talked to the receptionist at my building. She knows your daughter's godmother, I think." I asked around. Carefully she added, as if she knew how that sounded. "I'm not stalking you. I just lots. I had this, and when I heard about her I thought..." She held out a box, the kind that expensive art supplies came in. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were professional-grade sketch pencils. The kind Maya had circled in a catalogue at the library months ago, and never mentioned again, assuming they were impossible. They cost more than Marcus made in a day. He looked at Jennifer, at the careful way she held herself, ready for rejection, and something in him shifted. Not forgiveness exactly. Recognition. She was trying to do something real, and she was terrified of doing it wrong. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because I saw you turn down my money with more dignity than I've shown anyone in years." Marcus took the box without answering immediately. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, the presumption baked into the gesture. It would have been easier to refuse. Instead, he said, "Come inside. I'll make coffee." Jennifer hesitated, as if she'd expected a harder rejection and wasn't sure how to proceed with acceptance. She followed him into the garage office, past the metal desk where Maya did her homework, into the small back room with a coffee maker that had belonged to the previous owner and a window overlooking the parking lot. The rain had stopped. Everything was still wet and gleaming. "How did you find me?" he asked, running water into the machine. "I remembered the address from the receipt you didn't charge me for. And then, yes, I asked around. Like I said, not in a weird way, I promise." She sat on the edge of a folding chair as if she might bolt at any moment. "I'm Jennifer. I realized I never actually told you that. You only saw it on the check." "I know. The note. Right. Stupid. I do that thing where I assume people don't want to know my name if I'm just a transaction to them. So I try to make the first move, and it always comes out aggressive or desperate or both." She stopped, seeming to catch herself mid-spiral. "I'm doing it now, aren't I?" Marcus poured the coffee black for him, and he asked her how she took hers. She said cream, no sugar. It was such an ordinary detail that it made her suddenly real in a way she hadn't been before. Not the woman in the designer dress or the guilt-stricken stranger in the rain. A person who had preferences. "Your daughter," Jennifer continued. "Maya. The receptionist mentioned she liked to draw. I saw the sketches on the bulletin board at your building's mailroom. She's talented." "You went to my building?" "Just the mailroom. I needed to verify the address before I..." She saw his expression and held up her hands. "I know, it sounds insane. I'm aware of how I sound." But Marcus wasn't angry. He was confused. which felt worse somehow. People didn't usually go out of their way for people like him. They handed money over and felt better about themselves. They didn't follow up. They didn't ask questions about daughters, or notice sketches, or sit in garage offices drinking bad coffee on Saturday mornings. "Why the he asked. "The night you broke down." That wasn't casual. Jennifer wrapped her hands around the mug. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice had changed. Something underneath the careful politeness had cracked open. "I'd just left my husband's office. He's a partner at a firm downtown. We were supposed to go to a gala that night, the kind where you smile and shake hands and pretend everything is fine. I got as far as the car, pulled out of the parking garage, and realized I couldn't do it. Couldn't sit across from him and pretend I didn't know about the affair, or the embezzled firm funds he thinks no one knows about, or the fact that he's been telling everyone I'm unstable, that I drink too much, that I'm the reason our marriage is falling apart." She looked up at him. The car breaking down felt like a sign, like the universe saying, "Okay, you can stop now." "So you called the mechanic instead of going to the gala?" "I called the mechanic because my car died, and it felt like a mercy. And then you came out in the rain, and you didn't want anything from me on politeness, not gratitude, not money. Just the honest transaction of fixing the cable and letting me go. It was the first real thing that had happened to me all week." She set the mug down. "I'm sorry. That's a lot to put on a stranger." "You're not a stranger to me anymore," Marcus said, and meant it before he'd fully decided to say it. The coffee shop became routine after that. Tuesdays and Thursdays, after Marcus closed the garage at 6, he'd meet Jennifer at a small place 2 blocks away. She was navigating a divorce, she told him, separating assets, fighting over the house, dealing with a lawyer who cost more per hour than Marcus made in a week. She worked in corporate HR, which explained the dress, the learned politeness, the way she'd been trained to smooth over her own needs in service of everyone else's comfort. Somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that she was allowed to have rough edges. Maya noticed something was different with her father. She didn't comment directly, but she watched him more carefully, the way children do when they're trying to understand a shift in the world they depend on. She drew more. Her sketches became darker, more complex, city buildings with impossible angles, figures moving through rain-slicked streaks. Some of them looked like Jennifer, though Marcus didn't think his daughter had ever met her. Then, 4 weeks into the routine, Jennifer didn't show up. Marcus waited for an hour, ordered 2 coffees instead of 1, and finally texted the number she'd given him. No response. The next morning, he drove by her building, the nice part of town, the kind where the streets were lined with trees that had been planted deliberately, and sat in his truck feeling absurd. He didn't have the right to be worried. They'd had coffee a dozen times. That didn't create an obligation or promise. By evening, he'd convinced himself she'd moved on, decided her ex-husband's lawyer had advised her to stop seeing people like Marcus, figured out that mixing her life with his was impractical. It made sense. It was the logical ending. He'd lived long enough to know that good things rarely lasted when you weren't born into the right circumstances. He was closing the garage at 8 when Jennifer pulled up in her Mercedes, and this time it was his hands that shook. "My husband's lawyer served me with papers yesterday," she said without preamble, getting out of the car. "Custody threats. Claims I'm unstable, unfit. He's using my father against me, my father, who has dementia and doesn't even know whose side he's on anymore." She stopped in front of him, and her face was wet. "I'm scared, Marcus. I don't know what to do." He reached out and pulled her into his chest, and she collapsed against him like she'd been holding herself together with a single thread. "You're going to do what you always do," he said. "You're going to show up." Marcus did something he'd never done before. He called in a favor. There was a lawyer, a woman named Sandra, who had been bringing her truck to his garage for years. A single mother like him, in spirit, if not in circumstance, and he texted her at 9 o'clock at night. She responded within minutes. "Come by Monday. Bring her." Jennifer's ex-husband, Richard, had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that Jennifer's world was small enough that he could control it from above. He'd built his argument on the narrative of her instability, the gala she'd skipped, the occasional glass of wine she'd used to numb the loneliness of a marriage that had died years before they'd admitted it, but he hadn't counted on documentation. He hadn't counted on Marcus. On Sunday, Marcus asked Jennifer if he could see her phone. Not suspicious. He needed to understand what they were working with. She handed it to him, and he scrolled through months of text conversations with her therapist, with her HR department, with her father's medical team. Everything organized, dated, methodical. The evidence of a woman managing her life, not falling apart. He also found a photograph deep in her gallery, hidden in a folder labeled storage. It was from 15 years earlier, Jennifer and Richard on their wedding day. But what struck Marcus was how young she looked, how afraid, not afraid of him, but afraid of the future, of commitment, of promising something she couldn't deliver. "He looked different then," Jennifer said quietly, seeing what he was looking at. "He was different. Or I just didn't see him." "What changed?" "I did. I got older, and he got richer. And at some point, we became people who needed each other for very specific things that had nothing to do with actually knowing each other." She took the phone back. "There's something else you should know. He's been stealing from his firm. I don't have proof, but I've heard him on the phone. He thinks I'm asleep talking to someone about moving money through accounts. He's terrified someone will find out. The custody thing, the aggression, it's partly about making sure I stay quiet." Marcus sat with this. "Are you going to tell the authorities?" Sandra said not to. She said, "If I use it as leverage, it looks like coercion, and it weakens my position. But if I stay quiet, and he's found out later, ... double quotes, Jennifer trailed off. "I don't know how to win this without compromising myself." "Then we compromise strategically," Marcus said. "We gather evidence slowly. We build a case that doesn't depend on threats." They brought everything to Sandrine's office on Monday. She was sharp in the way of people who had fought for their survival in systems designed against them. She studied Jennifer's documents, made notes, asked specific questions about Richard's behavior, his absences, his habits. After an hour she looked up. "We can do this, but it requires Jennifer to be extremely careful. No angry emails, no confrontation. Everything documented, nothing volatile. She has to be the steady one." "I can do that," Jennifer said. "And Marcus," Sandra continued, turning her attention to him, "you need to understand what you're doing. If you're involved with her, he will come after you. He'll hire investigators, he'll find things. Your garage, your finances, your custody arrangements with Maya's mother. He will use anything he can." Marcus felt it settle in his chest, the real weight of the choice. Not just helping Jennifer, but opening his small, fragile life to scrutiny. He looked at Jennifer, and she was watching him with an expression that said she understood what she was asking. "Okay," he said. The first change came small. Marcus started keeping records. Not the obsessive kind, but the normal documentation of a business owner paying attention. He photographed the garage, the equipment, the jobs completed. He updated his books with actual precision instead of his usual loose accounting. When Jennifer asked why, he said simply, "We have to be ready for inspection." Maya noticed that her father was different, more careful about his appearance, more attentive during their evenings together. He helped her with her homework with genuine presence, instead of distracted nods. One night, she asked if he was seeing someone. "Yes," he said, "someone I care about. She's going through something difficult, and I'm helping. Is she nice?" "Yeah, she is." Maya was quiet, then pulled out one of her new sketches. The professional pencils had unlocked something in her work. The figure in the drawing was recognizable now. Jennifer standing in rain, but this time not broken, resolute. "She looks like she needs help," Maya said. "She does. And I'm giving it." But the real test came 3 weeks later, when Richard's investigators showed up at the garage. He was a thin man in an expensive suit, carrying a folder and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He asked to speak to Marcus in private. "Miss Morrison's husband is concerned about her spending time here, with you. He's wondering if there's a romantic relationship, and if so, whether it's affecting her judgment regarding their daughter." Marcus had prepared for this. He'd rehearsed it with Sandra, had settled on the truth. "Jennifer and I are friends. She broke down 3 weeks ago, literally broke down, and I helped her. Nothing beyond that changes the facts of who she is or how she parents. There's a suggestion that she's become unstable. The disappearance of funds from the household account, the late nights, the sudden change in behavior. The funds she spent on legal representation," Marcus said calmly, "and the late nights she's spending documenting everything your client has done for the last decade. I'd be unstable too." The investigator's smile tightened. He left the folder on Marcus's desk, photographs of Jennifer and Marcus at the coffee shop, transcripts of their conversations obtained through whatever means Richard had paid for, and walked out. Marcus sat alone in the garage for a long time, the photographs spread before him like a confession. Then he picked them up, called Sandra, and said 5 words that changed everything. "He's panicking. He's exposed." Sandra's voice came through sharp and satisfied. "Perfect. That's exactly what we needed." The hearing happened on a Thursday in December, in a courthouse that smelled like coffee and old wood. Jennifer wore a dark suit, professional, not expensive, and she was steady in a way she hadn't been 3 months earlier. Richard wore the same suit he always wore, the armor of a man who believed the world operated by rules he'd mastered. He didn't look at Jennifer. That was the first sign that he was losing. Sandra had spent weeks building the case, not with accusations, but with documentation. Jennifer's therapy records showing consistent mental health, her work evaluation showing competence and reliability, her father's medical team confirming that Jennifer had been his primary caregiver for 18 months, managing his decline with patience and presence. And then carefully, the financial inconsistencies in Richard's accounts, filed as context for why Jennifer had needed legal representation and why his credibility was questionable. The judge, older woman with reading glasses on a chain, listened to both sides. Richard's lawyer tried to portray Jennifer as unstable, erratic, influenced by a new relationship. Sandra simply presented documentation, dates, numbers, verifiable facts. "The evidence suggests," the judge said, "that Miss Morrison is a stable parent, and that the allegations of instability are inconsistent with her professional record and medical history. The court will award primary custody to Miss Morrison, with supervised visitation for Mr. Morrison, contingent on the resolution of the financial irregularities being investigated by the state bar." It took 3 seconds for the reality to land on Jennifer's face. Then she was crying, but quietly, her hand finding Marcus's on the bench beside her. But the resolution came with a consequence none of them had fully anticipated. Within 2 weeks, Richard was arrested. The embezzlement was worse than anyone had suspected. Hundreds of thousands of dollars routed through shell accounts. Enough to bring down 3 partners at his firm. And because Jennifer had refused to use the information as leverage, because she'd simply documented and allowed the system to work, she became a witness, not a victim. Not a victim seeking revenge, a person telling the truth. The media noticed. They loved a story about a powerful man brought down by his own corruption, a woman who'd escaped his control, a humble mechanic who'd stood by her. The narrative was clean, almost too clean, and it made Marcus deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't a hero. He'd just fixed a car and then gotten involved with someone he cared about. That was all. Jennifer's father had a stroke 2 days after the custody hearing. It was minor at TIA, but it rearranged everything. He was moved to a memory care facility, and Jennifer spent most of her days there, reading to him, sitting beside him, sometimes just holding his hand while he stared at things only he could see. Marcus accompanied her most afternoons after closing the garage. He didn't try to make conversation or force comfort. He just sat in the plastic chair beside her and existed in the difficult space of loving someone while helplessness moved through you like a current. One afternoon, Jennifer's father looked directly at her, really looked, with recognition, and asked her name. When she told him, he smiled and patted her hand like he was reassuring her about something. Then the moment passed and he was gone again into the fog. Jennifer held herself together until they got to the car, then fell apart in the parking lot with her head against Marcus's shoulder. "I want to adopt her," Jennifer said suddenly, still pressed against him. "My father. I want to make sure she's taken care of. I want to do something that lasts." "You already are," Marcus said. "You're here every day. That's not enough. Nothing feels like enough." He understood then that the thing Jennifer had been running from, the need to control outcomes, to ensure security through money and leverage, was still there, just transformed. Love didn't erase the patterns. It only gave them better targets. 3 months after the custody ruling, Jennifer and Marcus were sitting in his apartment, the same apartment Maya had grown up in, with the same worn furniture and the same view of the parking lot, when Jennifer pulled out an old photograph. It was from her wedding day, the one Marcus had seen in her phone, but she'd brought the physical print. She turned it over, and on the back, in faded ink, were the words her mother had written: "Be brave enough to change your mind." "I thought I lost this," Jennifer said. It was in a box Richard had packed away. He was throwing things out, consolidating. "And I found it yesterday, when I was getting my things from the house." She set it on the coffee table between them. "My mother died when I was 23. She never got to know that I did change my mind. About everything, actually. About what I needed, what I could accept, what love looks like." Maya came home from school 20 minutes later, and Jennifer and Marcus were still sitting there, the photograph between them, the rain starting outside. Maya dropped her backpack and looked at them with the clarity of a child who sees what adults try to hide. "Are you staying for dinner?" she asked Jennifer. "If that's okay." "It's okay," Mia said, and went to wash her hands. Over pasta that evening, Jennifer cooking, Marcus chopping vegetables, Maya setting the table. There was no performance, no negotiation of boundaries or careful discussion of intentions. Just the simple rhythms of people building something small and real. Maya showed Jennifer her new portfolio of sketches, professional work now, the kind of thing that had gotten her into a mentorship program at the Arts Center. In one drawing, Jennifer and Marcus stood together in rain, water streaming down their faces, but something unbroken in their posture. "It's just something I was thinking about," Maya said, seeing them look at it. "It's beautiful," Jennifer said, and meant it. That night, after Maya was asleep, Marcus and Jennifer stood on the small balcony, watching the street below. The garage was lit up, the bay doors closed, everything waiting for morning. Jennifer held the photograph of her wedding day, the girl she'd been, the promise she'd made to be brave enough to change, and then, without fanfare or gesture, she let it go. The wind caught it and carried it down into the street, where it landed face down on the wet pavement, fading slowly. "No more anchors?" Marcus asked. "Different ones," she said, taking his hand. "Better ones." By spring, they'd moved in together, and the garage had a second mechanic, a young guy Marcus had trained, which meant Marcus could take Wednesdays off. Jennifer had taken a position at a non-profit that helped women navigate divorce, and her salary was half what she'd earned before, but something in her face had settled into peace. Her father, in his moments of lucidity, asked for her by name. Maya's drawings were being shown in a local gallery. Small things, verifiable changes, the kind that lasted. On an ordinary Tuesday, 6 months after that first rainy night, Marcus stood in the garage, watching a woman pull up to the curb. Her car was making that familiar sound, something loose, something that needed fixing. He grabbed his jacket and walked out into the afternoon sun, ready to help a stranger, the way he'd helped Jennifer, the way he'd learned you could change the world by simply showing up. She stepped out of the car, and for just a moment, before he asked what was wrong, Marcus remembered. Some people fall into your life not because they're supposed to save you, but because you're both brave enough to fix what's broken.